From the San Francisco Bay Area, I'm your host, Sarah Scudder. I've spent my career in the print and marketing procurement space. I run RSN, a print sourcing tool software company. Our tool provides an innovative and painless way for procurement execs and marketers to buy high-quality print, including labels, for less. Companies that prosper in 2021 will excel at spend optimization, which can be defined as reducing non-strategic costs while simultaneously investing more in areas that will drive revenue and profit growth. RSN is hosting a series of virtual panel discussions to help procurement professionals master the art of print spend optimization. Each session in our series will address a single type of print spending, and each will feature panelists that have extensive experience with that spend category. Our session today is discussing labels. Next week, we are discussing content marketing services. The global market for printed labels was valued at $38 billion. Yes, that's billion with a B, in 2017, and is expected to reach $67 billion by 2026. Virtually all consumer products and many industrial products require labels, and many marketers view labels as an important part of brand identity. Our session today will examine how companies can maximize the value of their label investments. And I live in the Bay Area, as I mentioned at the beginning, and I used to live in wine country. And when I say wine country, I mean the real wine country in Sonoma County, California. And so labels were a really important part of where I lived because of the wine industry. And there was so many wineries and so many people competing for consumers that labels, I know, were a really important part of the process when companies were designing and developing their wine and figuring out how to market and brand them. So we're now going to kick off our panel. I'm super excited for our group here today. We've got a really, really diverse group of panelists from all over the US with very different backgrounds. So Jenny, I want to start off the conversation with you today. Before you answer the question, if you could introduce yourself to the group. I know you have a marketing background like me, so always fun to meet fellow marketers. My question for you is this. I want to start with some very, very basic things because not everyone here today knows a ton about procuring labels. So if you could just start off with what are the different types of label production methods and different types of labels, and then talk a little bit about what someone should do when they're going out and needing to source labels.
Absolutely. I am Jenny Johnson-Wolf. I'm a partner here at Label Specialties in Louisville, Kentucky, and partner is just a fancy way of saying I'm one of three owners. We're a trade-only label manufacturer, and that means we sell exclusively through a network of print brokers or print resellers, so I don't have a direct sales division. My background is in marketing like yours. I've spent many, many years buying print, but this is my family's business, so I've spent a long time manufacturing print as well. And I'm really excited to give some kind of behind the scenes tips to get the biggest bang for your label spend. Because like you, I think labels are important, and I think we all buy products based on the packaging and the labels. So first question, Sarah, it's a big one. So what's the different types of production, types of labels? The good news is there are infinite types of labels. The bad news is there are infinite types of labels. So the category most of us are probably dealing with are prime labels for consumer packaging. And even those labels can be broken down into subcategories. So you have food grade labels or chemical labels. And on top of that, there's tons of production methods that you can produce those labels. But most labels are for a custom application. So you may need a label that goes on a frozen package of fish, and somebody else may need a label that's a one color warning that goes on a bladder. But to keep it super simple, let's just say that the vast majority of labels can fall into three categories. Long run, which is typically ran flexo, but not always. And flexo printing requires plates. Short run labels are typically ran digital, which is a printing method that does not require plates, and it's often used for SKU proliferation. So if you think about a candle company that's got a ton of scents, they're going to likely use a lot of digital to print those, or blank labels. And those get printed with a thermal transfer printer or a direct thermal printer at the location. And it all sounds boring, but it's really important, because if you're going to source labels, you have to know a little bit about labels. And the most important thing you can know is your own personal recipe. So what does your label go on to? The label you're sourcing, what's its shape? What's its size? How many SKUs? What material? Does it have foil? What rewind direction? There are a lot of details in labels, and you have to understand how to read a label quote so you know what you're getting your price for. If you leave it up to us, all of the panelists here are all going to run a label in a way that meets our equipment and our needs, but that's not what you want. You want a label that fits your needs. Labels are a special form of print. So just like all print, how that label looks is really important. So print quality, really important to your marketing team especially. But labels also have a job to do. They have to stick. And it sounds simple, but sometimes it's not. So the worst thing you can ever do is save 10 cents a thousand on your label order and get a phone call that they all fell off. And it happens. And it's bad when it happens. We could do a whole other series. I know you do them, Sarah, on what goes wrong. Oh boy, labels can go wrong. But to sum it up, long answer short for this one, because we could talk a whole hour on it. Labels can be manufactured exactly how you need them to be manufactured for your team. You just have to know what to ask for, know how to read those quotes, or you have to have a really good relationship with a label sales rep. And that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, it can be a little overwhelming for people who don't have a lot of experience buying labels, because when you say that you can have or do anything, sometimes that's like, there's just too much to even process or think about. So I think it's important to really kind of hone in and figure out with your team, what are the things that are really important to you? What are the things that are not so important, to make it easier when you're going out and trying to source and get labels produced. I want a couple housekeeping notes before we move on to our next panelist. At the bottom, we have a chat function. So feel free to put fun notes or comments throughout. They can be as simple as, hey, labels are sexy and fun. If you have specific things you want to address or mention that the panel discussed, feel free to put those there. Then we also have a Q&A function at the bottom. So if you have specific questions for a panelist or for the panel as a whole, please put those in there and we will be asking those throughout. So do not be shy. We'd love to have questions so we can address specific needs or things that you're working on. All right, so next up we have Thomas. So Thomas, if you could introduce yourself to the group, talk a little bit about your background. And then my question for you relates to what Jenny mentioned. She talked about something called CPG, or consumer packaged goods. That can be an industry that consumes and buys a lot of labels. So what would be some tips that you have for a consumer packaged goods buyer when selecting and onboarding a new provider of labels and packaging? Because that can be really overwhelming to a buyer in that industry, not even know kind of what to look for or where to start. Tom, you're on mute. You got to unmute.
Okay, can you hear me now? Can you hear me okay? Yes. Okay, so yeah, started out with the introduction. As Sarah mentioned, I'm Tom Tyndall, president of Labels and Specialty Products. We're here in Chicago. I've been in the industry for 30 years, started right out of college and was working with pre-press equipment and selling it and training on it. And then later on got in the converting side and worked for a company called Mark Andy, which many of the panelists I'm sure are familiar with. I was a Midwest sales rep, and I've actually been to most of your companies, whether you know it or not, at some point in my life. So been in and out of probably 1,000 different label manufacturing companies over my career. And I've seen some that I could eat off the floor, some that I wouldn't even want to walk on the floor, and everything in between. So there's a wide variety of us out there, and we continuously work to be closer to the one that you could eat off the floor, but that takes just a lot of hard work, and we just keep at it. But company here has been around for 30 years. I acquired it 4 years ago, so 2016 is when I purchased the business, and it's been a fun ride, and learning more and more about labels every single day. And it's as Jenny mentioned, there's such a variety of different applications out there, as well as materials, et cetera. So it's an ever learning experience for me, and it's a fun one.
Now, Tom, tell us one of the fun facts. Tell us about your first car. How much did you pay for your first car?
So yeah, my first car was sold to me by a friend, and I paid $100 for it, and it was probably worth more than that, but it was a 4-door Chevy Nova with a 6-cylinder engine, forest green. It was quite the car to pick up the chicks in, I got to say. I mean, it was very impressive. But anyway, yeah, that was one of the cars that I always kind of look at and say, what a value that was. So
I call that a babe magnet. We should have done a show and tell and had a pic of the car.
Trust me, it was not the babe magnet at all. Anyway, yeah. So getting back to the question, tips for the CPG buyer. In my experience, the more information that we get, the better we can present and propose a solution. I've even come to the point where I've generated a spreadsheet for our customers to help them organize their information so that they can provide us the information we really need. And it's as simple as share with us all your SKUs, and share with us the sizes of those SKUs, and then we can kind of group them by size. That helps us with efficiency and what have you. The artwork that is for all those SKUs. So if you're really looking at, if we're not just pricing out a transaction, and that's what I'm really getting at, just order by order transactional sales, they're fine. Then you just provide, here's what we need. But if you really have a fairly large piece of business that you want to look for an alternative supplier or a new one altogether, whatever, the more information that the company you're looking at bringing on board, or at least giving them a shot at, the more information they have, the better off they're going to be. We've seen a lot of situations where we can recommend, and this goes for anyone on this panel, but the more information you have, the more you can get creative about the offering, the more you can get creative about pricing. So I can't stress that enough. Give us the full scope of work, give us as much detail as you have, and that's just going to serve everyone better. It's going to allow the new potential supplier to really put their best foot forward, and maybe come up with ideas that the incumbent didn't even think of, because they've just had the business and it's been business as usual for them. A newcomer can bring some value by getting maybe a little bit more creative.
Tom, you mentioned, providing a spreadsheet and getting as much information as you can. What are the reasons why somebody would change label suppliers? I mean, the obvious is price, but what are some of the other things that you're seeing where somebody, because it's a lot of work. If a company's buying a significant amount of labels and they have a fulfillment program, there's a lot of time and resources involved. So why would somebody be looking to change label suppliers or partners?
Well, I think there's a couple of reasons, and forgive me if I offend anybody on here. I don't think I will, but there's been a lot of merger and acquisition activity in this industry, and I see a couple of you nodding your heads. When that happens, there can be disruption. There can be changes of sales reps that have a relationship can be let go because they're maybe high income earners, and the new mantra is to cut costs. We're merging all these companies together. We got to cut out some of the extra costs. And so there's disruption like that can spook some of the buyers. They've got a job to do too. They got to procure labels to feed their production lines. And when a disruption while on one hand, the merger is designed to create value, but in some cases it disrupts the supply chain, and that would cause a buyer to maybe consider new options. Another one would be just some disruption altogether. With COVID, there's been huge changes in the marketplace, and demand curves have changed a lot in different segments. So as lead times go out, a buyer would say, wow, my current supplier is struggling with this for one reason or another. Maybe they're favoring other larger customers, and some of their smaller ones are not as meaningful or as important, and they just don't have the capacity, so they got to make decisions. So that would then create a situation where a buyer would have to start looking for alternatives. We have one example right now where a nutraceutical company they were buying from XYZ, then they went to ABC company, and now we're in the hunt. They said that their delivery times used to be about 6 days in terms of turnaround of their product. It's gone to 6 to 8 weeks. So there's disruption and the change in the turnaround time that's caused them to start looking at alternatives. So.
Yeah, and 6 days to 6 weeks is substantial. I mean, that's major impact on business operations.
Exactly.
So we've got some questions already coming in from the audience. So Tom, I'll throw this to you first, and then I'll open this up to Mark, Jenny, and Christine as well. Question is, what are the biggest opportunities in label sales? And what are some of the biggest challenges facing label manufacturers today? So let's break that into two parts. Let's talk about opportunities in label sales first. So Tom, any insights you have for somebody who maybe is looking to get into label sales?
Yeah, I mean, I start your circle of prospecting close. I mean, the closer you are to the opportunities in terms of distance, geographics. I mean, even though here we are on a Zoom call, and I would also say if we're talking about resellers and distributors, the closer the opportunities are to the manufacturing plant are key. I mean, if we're really talking about a partnership, everybody has challenges from time to time. For one thing or another, and Jenny mentioned it. If the labels aren't sticking, what's wrong? Well, things do happen, and having a geographic, being close geographically allows the label manufacturer to investigate, get to a root cause, solve the problem, prevent it from ever happening again, whatever. So I think if you're getting into this and trying to figure out where the opportunities are, start close and then work your way out. As far as markets, I mean, the cannabis market, pretty much across the United States is one that seems to be picking up a full head of steam. So that's always, where there's growth, there's opportunity. So I would say that would be my advice right there.
Yeah, so Tom, we hosted a panel last week talking about packaging, and one of our panelists, he was saying he's a manufacturer. About 70 to 80% of his business right now is coming from the cannabis industry, and he expects it to continue to grow. I'm in California. We are very cannabis friendly here, so it's a huge, huge market for California and a lot of the West Coast states. Christine, any other thoughts or insights you have for biggest opportunities in label sales?
Sure. From my perspective, I would say finding your sweet spot, finding what fits. That's going to bring the most success to not only the manufacturer, but also the end user and the customer. So for example, if I get an inquiry for labels that are 5,000 labels, that doesn't fit my Flexo equipment very well. It's going to cause costs that are far exceed the market price for that particular label, for an example. But if you have a large running strategic approach that our equipment set is well suited for, I think that that is one of the keys to success for not only the manufacturer, but the partnership with the customer as well. Finding where you fit, finding innovation as well, where you're able to bring some value and innovation, I think is another area of opportunity. So again, it's finding where things fit best. You don't want to go and try to hit it all or to be the answer for everything, because you can't, most likely. But I would say that's the greatest area of opportunity, is to find where there is a strategic fit.
And as a salesperson, we all have personal interests. So I think you can really align things that you're passionate about if you're exploring a career in labels, and make sure you look for companies that have that as the sweet spot or focus on specific industries. Mark, I'm going to ask you the second part of that question, which was about what are the biggest challenges facing label manufacturers today?
Well, it probably depends, as some of the panelists have said. There's different types of printing, and in the flexo world, it's getting personnel. We're in St. Louis, and we're 20 minutes from Mark Andy. So to some degree, flexo world started right here. There's a lot of flexo shops, and there's a lot of very, very poor flexo operators in the marketplace, as everybody here has probably found over the years. And getting that right person that can do the work, understands what they're doing, and put out a good product consistently and quickly can be a bit of a challenge. Then on the flip side, we have a high-speed inkjet hybrid press, where we have new technology that typically your older operator that runs a flexo press, it's pushing buttons and working on a computer versus turning dials and tweaking things that you have understood because you've done it for 30 years. So in our case, we have two operators. We have a graphics person that's out running the art side of it and running the digital side of it, working with the flexo, because a lot of times you can't tell where the problem really lies. You may think it's in the digital file, but in actuality, it's not. So I think finding people that want to get into this world, into the print world, is a challenge. That would be our biggest challenge. And on the other question, I would add, I think innovation is correct from the perspective of a salesperson. I think it's finding, if you're going to represent somebody, I think somebody that has innovation and somebody that has new technology. We find that most of our business that we pick up comes, as Thomas said, from one of the mergers, where those lead times have gotten pushed out or people have moved on. And also a lot of the smaller label companies that are still around that don't have the newer technology, and they're trying to compete with the new technology on 7, 8, 9, 10 color jobs that I can literally print in 15 minutes, and they've got 3 hours worth of setup.
Yeah, there's a common theme we're seeing across our entire series, which is a focus on innovation and technology. And I think it's really impacting all parts of the print industry, no matter what segment you're in. Next question we have, Jenny, I ask this to you first. The question is, some labels are functional and serve a purpose, but for those labels that help drive sales, what is innovation? Is it foil? Is it die cutting? Is it easier application to product? In your experience, what do customers expect or think, and what can you give them as innovation?
Oh, great question. For us, and we do a lot in the cannabis space. We do a whole lot in the beer and wine and spirit space. We're in Louisville, Kentucky, so we do like our booze. And exactly. And almost every label in cannabis, alcohol, they all are asking for foil. We do a digital foil that's actually applied digitally. So it allows you to do tons of really high-end holographic spot foils, multiple colors on one job. And it happens all with no make ready, and it's beautiful. That is incredibly popular right now. We also see a lot of demand for raised varnishes. You guys have seen this in the store where you see it looks like it has matte, and then it has gloss on it, and then it's got a little lift to it. So I call them bells and whistles. Everybody, I'm blessed. This is my company. I get to play with our equipment. All of my samples that I send out to folks, they all have glitter, sparkle, holographic foil, and that's what gets people's attention in a sample pack. It's also what gets people's attention when they're walking down an aisle in a grocery store, which is really the purpose of investing all of that money. The other thing that we have been doing a ton of, and I'm sure we're not alone in this, is what I call mass customization. So you can do massive packaging jobs, and each individual package can be unique. It can have a name on it for Christmas gifts. So you do personalized candles for a candle company where every person who receives it has their name on that candle. Kind of like back to the Coca-Cola project that we all remember with names on it. So I would say bells and whistles. So glitter, foil, holographic, raised varnish, those are all digital innovations. Those are innovations that are happening in the digital space. So you can combine all of that with the mass customization, and you end up with some really killer labels. And if you can stop somebody in a grocery store when they're walking down it to look at your product, you just won. So
I know I'm someone who definitely buys based on label. If it's a product I've not tried before, a brand I'm not heard of, I'm definitely more drawn to something that's a little more flashy and unique and innovative. So I can definitely speak to that as a female consumer. Mark, Thomas, or Christine, any other things that you're experiencing that customers are doing to drive innovation for labels outside of just functional labels, but things that are really wanting to flash or stand out?
Well, first and foremost, I think everybody on the panel will agree with me when I say being in the label business and walking through the grocery store can be a bit of a curse because you tend to see all the labels that aren't quite right while you're with your significant other, and they just want to pull you away and get you moving down the aisle to pick out what you're there for. So we've all lived that world. From an innovation standpoint, my background is in specialized converting, whereby we had 10, 12, 15 station machines, all servo driven, vision controlled, where we layered products and created products for the medical field, for a variety of fields. And I bought this label company, 5 years ago. I have a little boy who's 13. He has a lot of disabilities, so I retired from my old company. I sold it. And I got back into this once he got into school. So I started putting together my background in that field with the label side of things. So with the hybrid press, all of the things that Jenny was talking about, where you can do variable data, variable imaging, variable QR codes, combined with a lot of bling, are all things that we can do in a single pass. So we think the innovation that we have, the technology we have right now, is at the head of the class from a perspective of about 35,000 lineal feet of material down, 13-inch wide, which can be a hell of a lot of labels depending on what you're doing. Or it can go higher than that when we get into the variable QR codes in the back office that we've developed, so that our customers can do things like change coupons on the fly once it's on a product. We're working toward even being able to communicate with that person. So we spent a lot of time, effort, and money away from labels on processes that are a part of the label, trying to bring the analog and the digital worlds together. That's where we spend our time and money, and we think it's going to pay dividends for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Mark, you mentioned the hybrid print capabilities, which includes flexo and digital, all in the same platform. For somebody who doesn't come with a label background, why is that important to the buyer or the marketer? What are the main things that they would say, okay, well, we really want to go with this hybrid approach?
Well, from a purchaser's perspective, they hear digital a lot. And I tell people that I talk to that are trying to figure out the world of labels, digital isn't digital. There's an ink toner based digital, which is one thing, and then we have what's inkjet. There's a speed differential. There's a cost differential. There's a place for both. Don't get me wrong, but in a hybrid situation, we're basically a flexo unit on steroids. We have the ability to do 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 colors, whatever you would want to do. We can pre-treat, we can backside print prior to going into the digital component, and then coming out, we can spot coat varnishes, whether you want a matte finish in one area, or you want to put a foil down, a holographic foil down, and print on top of it. Raised print is available. All of those things can be done at pretty high speeds. So we fit in that area where it's not 100 or 200 or 300 labels, but it's 5,000, 10,000, up to maybe 200,000 or 300,000. Again, depending upon if you're going to be utilizing the back office, maybe it's even more. So that's where we fit, and that's why we purchased the hybrid.
Yeah, very, very interesting. And you mentioned earlier too about customization. We're seeing that a ton with our clients as well. They're really focused on customizing things. So the end product that the customer receives is very specific and unique to them. Whether it has their name, maybe they love the color red, it's the newest Mercedes that they're interested in. It means a lot more and can be more impactful when you have that very specific information. So I think customization is going to continue to be a huge trend in the label space. Christine, I'm going to go ahead and have you introduce yourself. And then we've got some more questions that have come in from the panel. So I want to ask you one of those, and then I want to talk a little about sustainability as well.
Sounds good. Thanks. I'm Christine Ochtermeyer. I'm with the Outlook Group. Outlook has been around over 40 years. We're very diverse here. We do label, lots of label, prime label, digital label. We are heavily focused on some innovation in the converting area and in reduction of materials. And sustainability is a very strong focus for us. We also do unique in the sense of being a label house. We are also a manufacturer of packaging in flexible packaging, paperboard packaging, and we do contract packaging. So we're a little bit different in that sense. So we do a lot, but what we do is we focus on what we do well and where we can bring that greatest value to our customers and end users. So my background is, it started in distribution of packaging. I won't say how long ago, but it was a really long time ago. Just saying. I don't want to talk about my first car either, because that might give things away, but I paid less than $100 for mine, just saying. But it was, it started out in packaging a very long time ago in distribution, and I found myself in manufacturing, which I'm very drawn to. There is so much to learn and to glean from manufacturing that, to me, I will learn until the day I die. I will never know it all. I will always know a little bit, and enough to hone in on where there's value. So from my perspective on label production and innovation, the bells, the whistles, the glitter, the raised varnish, all of that is absolutely prevalent, and it's valued in the marketplace. We focus a lot on innovation in the sense of down gauging, and how do we do that? How do we convert very thin film, things like that. So we have innovation on the flip side, where maybe it might not be as sexy on the shelf, although we produce a very high quality label that you won't be pulling off the shelf because it's wrong. But you will find very good high quality labels that have brought sustainability and innovation on the backside. Maybe that the consumer doesn't see as much, but our customer does.
So Christine, one of the trends that we're seeing, I think, just in the industry as a whole, across all different types of print and many different categories in procurement in general, is a big focus on sustainability. It's becoming a bigger priority for companies. It's becoming part of their targets, part of their benchmarks. It's an executive down driven decision now. And I know that this extends to the label space. So what are some of the sustainability innovations that you're most excited about this year? Either things that you've seen already happen or things that you see are coming in the pipeline from a sustainability perspective?
Sure. So from our perspective, we're seeing a lot of focus on sustainability. I think the pandemic has really brought that to the forefront, thankfully. I think that that's a very good effort. Recyclable shrink sleeve is, I would say, one of the most exciting today. There's a lot of efforts going on. So we believe that a recyclable shrink sleeve brings a lot of value. A shrink sleeve alone is a label that goes around the package, 360-degree imagery. You've got full billboard to that package. So as an example, you're going to get it all the way around, top to bottom, all the way around. But it was never as recycle friendly. So finding areas of opportunity in sustainability that allows for that shrink sleeve to enter the recycle stream that is more friendly to that environment, meaning if the consumer does not take it off the container, it would deem that container non-recyclable, depending on the material used. So if it's using the right material on that same container, it can then be recycle friendly and allow that to happen, whether it be ground with the container itself, or it allows it to separate and come away from that container in the recycle process so that the container is still recyclable. And that small amount of label material can then come away from that. So we think that that's pretty exciting in that space. There's a lot of other areas of sustainability efforts that that come into play as well. But again, that shrink sleeve we feel is one of the major areas of opportunity today.
So Christine, if I'm a buyer at a company or someone on the procurement team or even maybe on the marketing team, and I'm innovating and trying to find, a label provider, are there specific certifications or things that I should ask for when I'm talking to suppliers to know that they have sustainable practices? Well,
Outlook Group as a company sustainability is at the forefront, excuse me, for us. So we are landfill avoidance in the way that we operate. So to me, it's going to depend on what the client is looking for. If they're looking for a partner who is sustainable focused as well in their operations, as well as the product that they're putting out, which is sustainable, I think that's a great marriage. So from our perspective, we feel that being sustainable as a company is just as important as producing product that is sustainable for our clients and our customers and the earth. It all matters. And we're focused on it because we feel responsible on all aspects of that. So I think that having that conversation with their label supplier to understand their practices, what they do as a company, as well as what they offer in a sustainable space is equally important. And there are some areas of sustainability and recyclability that will come from the brand owner's responsibility as well. So there's areas of how to recycle, for example, is something a brand owner pays for that helps them to market that on their packaging that says that this is recyclable or this can be disposed of in a certain manner. And I think that that's important for brand owners to really understand and have a partner that can take them down that path.
Yeah, it's for me and my company as well. Sustainability is really important. It's a part of our software and our sourcing tool, and we're seeing more organizations include sustainability in RFIs or RFPs. So really exciting progression to see. So another question that we had come in from the audience is about the shift to more things happening online versus in person, which has heavily been driven by COVID. The question is, are we going to see a greater focus on online PDF labels? So I'll see if any panelists want to take that. So the question is moving from a physical printed label to labels that are more online driven with QR code type things. And if we don't have any thoughts on that, that's okay too.
I think most of us are producing customized labels where you have branding and you have a variety of information that the customer wants to supply or be seen on the shelf. So to have PDFs out there other than for tooling purposes, which we do in some markets, we offer a variety of products. Print can be variable, whatever you would want. But if you purchase the designs that we have, of course, then we have the tooling specific to that substrate. So I don't know if that answers the question completely, but that's how we look at it.
Okay.
It sounded to me, based on that question, that maybe there's a thought that highly decorated labels would not be as much value with the internet. Maybe put a basic QR code on and then look up all the information online. But I don't. The label performs a function, and it's part of branding. It's part of standing out amongst others on a shelf or even in an online catalog, whatever. So the label really just kind of defines the product and really gives it a personality. So I don't think we're going to go to QR codes across the board to differentiate products, because then there's no differentiation at all.
And again, being a female consumer, highly into fashion, we have a lot of deliveries here at my house. Labeling is really important for the user experience when you get your product, and being able to touch and feel and remember that brand, place a reorder. So I personally don't see labels going away and all of that moving to online labels. Maybe if there's a functionality or tracking purpose, but I think it's a really important part of the consumer experience to have those physical labels.
I agree. I think that adding that QR code just enhances, it'll take you to more information, but it's certainly not going to take away from what the label intends. And Sarah, if you ordered something online based on what you saw on the screen and you got it to your house and it came with a black and white QR code label, I think that would be slightly disappointing. And it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to communicate more, not to take away. So I think it allows for additional opportunity, not to take away from it.
Yeah. We had another question come in for you, Christine, about sustainability. The question is, are all labels recyclable?
No, they are not. There are efforts underway that allow for the label to separate in the recycle stream. So they are not. You have components. A lot of labels could have a paper face, the adhesive, but it can also have an overlam on it. So you've got multiple materials going on in that label that could deem it unrecyclable. You could have a paper label on a poly mailer that has now contaminated that. And unless you remove that label, that mailer is now no longer recyclable. So there are areas of innovation, I believe, in the label space that allow for those labels to flake off and come away from what's being recycled. Then that deems that more of a recycle friendly or recyclable label. If there are multiple adhesives and layers of materials and different mixes of materials, that contaminates a recycle stream. So no, they are not.
Christine, an add-on to that question, does the adhesive flake too?
It does. You also have to be careful of the amount of ink you put on so that you don't create too much weight within that process. So the label is made such that it will flake in that sense, but it's a combination of things: the chemistry, the amount of ink that goes down on it, the adhesive, and the material itself. They all have to marry appropriately for it to function in that sense.
Okay, thank you. Jenny, another question come in from the audience. We'll start with you, and we might need a little more clarification, Mark, on this question. But the question is poor product on the shelf a threat to the industry or an opportunity?
Well, I would say that depends on whether you printed that poor label or someone else did, because if someone else printed it, it is an opportunity. If you printed it, it's a threat. Oftentimes, it's obviously mistakes happen. We've had a little chat going on about the things that you see when a label can go bad. Something like we see flagging a lot in the label industry. That's just if you have a round container and the edge of the label is lifting off, it's called flagging. Oftentimes, it's the result of the wrong adhesive, wrong material for the container that it goes on. Those things are opportunities to educate clients so that they know what to ask for, and they tell us things like that's going on a test tube is really, really important, or that's going in a freezer. So that's an opportunity, but it's also a sales opportunity. But as far as for the industry itself, I would say it's a negative on the industry itself, but it could definitely mean business is moving.
Yeah.
So Jenny, another question for you about the freight and transport side of the business. We've talked a lot about the front end and sustainability and manufacturing and the look and feel, but you also have to get the product to the end customer. There may be a warehousing and fulfillment component included in a program as well. So how do you ship labels, and how should someone factor shipping and freight and warehousing and fulfillment and all the back end stuff into their buying decisions?
Oh, good question. On a per label basis, the great news is shipping is dirt cheap. I just shipped an order. I pulled an order just so I could look at some numbers from Louisville to New York City for a few hundredths of a penny per label. But when you consider that it's for multiple millions, those hundredths of a penny start adding up really quick. So yeah, absolutely, shipping needs to be factored into a purchasing decision, but not just price. Shipping has a huge impact on turn times, and turn times are incredibly important for a product to go out the door. The story I always say is a bourbon story. So you have a $100 bottle of liquor and a label that cost 1/10 of 1 penny. That $100 bottle of liquor does not get sold until they get their hands on their 1/100th of 1 cent label. So it's not just about the price, it's also about the turn time. You don't have to order from somebody in your hometown, but you definitely need to consider transit times, especially if you find yourself in need of just-in-time inventory. I can print you 50,000 labels today. They can ship in 24 hours, but how you ship that is really what's going to make or break your turn time. How they ship, labels can ship in a box if it's a couple of thousand. They can ship on a skid for LTL. We also ship a full truckload if you're buying that many labels. But here's the big thing when you're purchasing or you're a buyer who maybe isn't as familiar with the label industry. Don't assume freight is included in your label price. Ask for your quotes to always come in with every additional charge listed separately. Shipping should be listed. Handling should be listed if they have a handling charge. Blind shipping fees should be listed. So yeah, absolutely include freight in your purchasing decision. And also when you go back to some of the stuff Christine was talking about, how far something comes from the label plant to the end warehouse has a lot to do with its footprint on our environment as well. So yeah, good question though.
Someone put in the chat that in regards to you mentioning really making sure that lead times are noted, they said their foils are on a 6 to 10 week lead time right now.
Wow.
Give one of us a call.
Yes. Fix that, can't we, Mark?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that now I think he's in Canada, so I'm not sure, what the market is like in Canada. We're all US based. Mark?
My wife's Canadian. Does that help?
Haven, we'll send you contact information after to help you with your lead times. Tom, to talk a little bit more about what Jenny highlighted about the freight and transport, what are you seeing are things that are important for companies to look at from a warehousing and fulfillment perspective? I know that can be really key and central. Some people are going to ship product to their own warehouse or fulfillment center, but they may ask you as a manufacturer to handle that for them as well.
Yeah, I kind of goes back to maybe one of the first questions you asked me, which is, what is it you need from a CPG company to make them successful? It's kind of dovetails into that situation. And it's really about partnering and becoming kind of integrated in your customer's business or them in ours. And that goes both ways. The more label printer converter understands the whole picture, the demand, what the demand cycles look like, the more we can get creative on how we supply. And in some cases it may be there's min-max levels that in my prior life, I've done a lot with that with some very large CPG companies where basically we were required to hold a certain amount of inventory, and we might have managed maybe 50, 60 SKUs, different items, but there was a min-max that we would always have on hand. And once we got to the minimum, we would put in an internal order to run more to keep the inventories level. So, everybody's set up differently. We have very large warehousing capability, so we can run programs like that with blanket purchase orders. And again, it's a partnership at that point, though. It really is. It's not, we're not going to run and keep inventory and not have some sort of an agreement in place that protects us from obsolescence or whatever. But yeah, I think the main thing is understand what the demands are, what their warehousing capabilities are, how much they want to have on hand, how much they're willing to. It goes the other way too, where you could share with them the transparency of, hey, this is the quantity of run that really fits us. And I think we've talked a little bit about that too, the fit. So if we can leverage to get to that volume, you save on money. Okay, we got to just figure out between us who's going to store what where. But there's that conversation that just needs to be had, and that's all about partnering and really becoming integrated with one another's companies.
Tom, one of the things that we're seeing at RSN is a huge shift to just-in-time or print-on-demand. We've helped companies transition, millions of dollars of inventory, reducing it down to 60, 70, 80% print-on-demand. Are you seeing more a bigger shift from your clients as well, really driving and pushing print-on-demand programs, or are you seeing more companies still focused on maintaining inventory?
We have both, but the larger and we have digital capabilities for the smaller enterprises that have a lot of items and low volumes, whatever. So we can fit that. But on the larger volume accounts, it tends to be there needs to be a little bit of a inventory somewhere in the supply chain, whether it's on my floor or theirs or whatever. Because if they don't really know their demand curves so well, and all the planning in the world can't necessarily predict what's going to happen tomorrow. And there's always, especially in private label is very challenging for a lot of like food manufacturing companies to manage, because they just don't know from day to day what's going to come in the door. Their sales forecasting is not good, unfortunately. And the private label orders just come in randomly, and when they come in, they got to fulfill them, and that's it. So the print on demand we can certainly do, but there's always, again, on some of the larger, higher volume stuff, there's got to be some inventory stored somewhere, and that's where the min-max kind of comes from. No one wants to have too much, but you got to have some buffer stock available.
Yeah, and I think, Tom, a big factor is industry. Some industries like food and pharma may be super time sensitive. Other inventories maybe not as time sensitive, which can be more friendly to print on demand versus having inventory levels. Mark, we had a couple more questions come in about QR codes. So could you describe to us, first of all, what is a QR code? I don't know if you have a sample of anything in your office, but if you could talk to us a little bit about what that is. And then how does connecting off-the-shelf products directly to the manufacturer via a QR code even work?
Well, QR codes have been around a long, long time. They had a heyday 20 years ago. They kind of went away. It just basically, back in the day, you had to download an app, and then you had to utilize that app to collect that data, and it would basically redirect you to an individual page, whether that page was your website or it was a page that you would want to, in some way, shape, or form, change from time to time. So in today's world, and we're all learning primarily because of COVID, I think the the group of people that are maybe under 35 or 40 are more comfortable with QR codes and the use of QR codes, and right, and so now the older group, like myself, although I am a little technology driven, they're starting to understand the camera on your phone scans immediately. All you have to do is hold it up like you're going to take a picture, and it'll take you wherever you want to go. So
I made sure my parents knew that.
Well, they've learned it now because of restaurants. If you go anywhere, they don't have menus. They don't want you to handle anything. So there's been a real drive toward the utilization of QR codes. So as an example, we're working with a local, it's actually a friend's business who has got 14 or 15 restaurants in the St. Louis area. And as part of this pandemic, he's had to change gears pretty rapidly to keep his business afloat. And so what he started doing was some of the products that are his best sellers, he's now putting them in supermarkets, right? So what we're able to do is we're able to, a couple of things. We can put a variable QR code, which simply means it's individualized. So when we process digitally, we can import a file, 1 to 1 million or 1 to 200,000 or however many labels you would want. And we individualize those codes. And what that allows us to do on the back end with our software is a whole host of things. First and foremost, the device that scans it, we can recognize that device, number one. We can do a redirect to where, in my friend's case, you're going to get a discount by simply taking that QR code into his restaurant. So now you bought something from the local grocery store, and he wants to drive you back to his local restaurant. And that might be something that you don't use right away because you're not comfortable, but it's something that hopefully at some point will be a benefit to you. It also gets you, to get that value, you have to opt in like anything else, which is typically not a big deal today, especially again with the younger set. And once that's happened, there's a variety of things that we can do. Pizza's on the shelf. If he would want to do a coupon, he can simply put a label on there that says scan for coupon. If those pizzas aren't moving quick enough, maybe he's got 10 SKUs and 2 of them aren't moving, he can make that coupon say 25% off. If they start moving too fast or too slow, he can increase it or decrease it without ever changing that label. So there's a whole host of things that are going to go on the back end that don't functionally make you change the product on the shelf. Into the future, in the next generation, not even the next generation, we're likely going to put this out in tranches so that the people that come in and they license our software will learn A, B, C, and D out of the gate, which might be simplistic things like, having that page with the coupon, a couple of different redirects, all the way to where when you get to XYZ, you can communicate back to that individual. You can create communities through the QR codes. You start to understand who your end users are and how much of your product they're buying. And it's possible for you then to communicate back to them, to get input, to maybe sign them up for a new sampling that you may want to do testing. A whole host of things is how these things can be used. So we see that innovation, as was mentioned, not as a be-all for the label. That's not it. It's the value behind the scene that you can apply to the label in a relatively small footprint. We basically need a 1/2 inch by a 1/2 inch somewhere on that label. So we see that as new technology. It's old technology, but because of phones now scanning without a problem and the ability to manage that data on the back end, we see that as innovation that isn't in the marketplace very well right now.
Thank you, Mark. Christine and Jenny, we have another question from the audience. I'll ask both of you, and then I'm gonna close out with a fire round asking each of you to share your favorite innovation that you're most excited about in 2021 in regards to labels. So I'll give each of you guys to think about your number one fave innovation you're looking forward to. So Jenny and Christine, the question is, are you seeing labels with virtual reality components?
we have the challenge with virtual reality on a label is the same challenge for any kind of print that. So basically, if you don't know, virtual reality on the label is kind of like there was a Crimes wine. You can hold your phone up to it. When your phone sees the label, it changes to a video and kind of plays it in real time. And it's a very, very cool marketing shtick and I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean it's a cool way to do something. The challenge with it is actually getting the virtual reality in the artwork. We can print it. I can print all sorts of virtual reality, but it's the brand's responsibility to work with a company who creates that content. Having a label that scans is the easy part. In virtual reality on labels, I have the easy job. I just print it. I have a HP Indigo. It's going to print perfect. It's going to be a beautiful label and it's going to work. The hard part is the folks who they need to work with an ad agency that does this, that can create the videos, that can create the artwork, that has it embedded in it so that when a phone scans it, it works. But yes, we have done some of those projects.
I concur. It's the same thing. We're printing. We're not creating that content. So if the client needs something on that label that triggers that, we can certainly do that day in and day out. Whether it's behind the scenes to create the reality of it, that's the hard part. I agree with you, Jenny. That's
some of the QR codes that we've created for people that's a little bit unique. Does some of that without it being embedded in the art. The QR code can take you to a landing page where the president of the company or a spokesman for that company can simply thank you, to make that experience a little bit of thank you for the purchase, and maybe explain to you where all the funds are going. If it's going to help disabled children, because it's some star that wants that's his shtick and that's what he wants to do. It's important that you understand that, and you might print it on the label as well. But this is a way just to make that experience a little bit better, which is really no different than embedding it in your art.
All right, so we are at our hour. I want to close out our panel with our fire round. I'm going to ask each panelist to share the innovation they're most excited about this year in the label space. So Tom, we're going to start with you.
Yeah, I'd say for me, again, I've been in this industry for a long time, and my favorite innovation was the digital press when it used to be called Indigo, and they came out probably 15 years ago, and no one really could get their head around how do I make money with it? It's $1 million. What do I do with it? Now there's probably 1,000 of them nationwide, maybe more. I don't know, but just the digital printing in general is just so intriguing, and it's kind of like, I mean, I've got an Apple Watch on now. I can talk. I can have a phone call on my watch. I mean, anything digital just moves at such a fast rate and develops. So I'm just, even though it's 15 years ago it first came out, there's so many other players in the market right now that are manufacturing digital presses, and they all can do different things. So it's just really cool to stay in tune with what it can do and how it's evolving, because it's maybe 80 feet per minute today, maybe it's 120 feet per minute next year, who knows. And I'm just continuously intrigued in that space, and it solves for what Mark said. There's the conventional printing isn't very sexy. It's not as sexy as my 4-door Nova, that's for sure. But digital printing, I can get somebody from high school, just graduated high school, put them on one of these machines, and they can start running it. And it's not that easy, don't get me wrong, but I think you all know what I mean. It's a much more user-friendly process than the conventional stuff, and it's becoming a little bit of a lost art. So digital printing and the development of it is still where I stay very focused on.
Well, Tom, thank you for being with us today, and congrats on purchasing your company. That's a big task and a lot of headache and stress. So we're really happy to have you here today. Next up, we have Jenny with her favorite innovation.
Oh gosh, there's so much that I'm excited about this year. Probably the most exciting thing, and if you ask me tomorrow, my answer is probably going to be different, Sarah. But today I am most excited because we just ran an order for a liquor label. Again, we like our booze. And it was a fulfillment project for kind of their brand advocates, where we custom foiled with a digital file in foil on the label each of those folks' names. And to me, that's a pretty cool project that you can do basically a prototype label, same stock, same quality of print as what goes on the real packaged liquor. And it can be customized with the recipient's name in the same foil. And to me, that's just kind of cool. So today, that is my favorite label innovation.
I think the name makes the liquor taste better. And we had another question also, Jenny, come in. I'll ask you this, Christine, as well. Do you have any examples of brands that are doing virtual reality labels well, if somebody wants to research and kind of see some examples? Oh, you're on mute still.
Sorry. I think the big one is the True Crimes wine. If you want to Google it, that's the one I would go to. They were kind of first out. They've done a nice job with it. They do some fun stuff. But that would be the one I would Google if I was looking for a little more information.
I would agree. They started it and they're still leading it. I think they're doing a great job on that. Agreed.
Christine, favorite innovation in the label space for 2021?
For me, I think that peel and reseal is maybe not as shiny and glittery and sexy, but it's good innovation, and it allows for reduction in materials, and you got far less material to do that same quality of job in keeping something fresh in a container. And then just another side note, microliner PCR, so post-consumer recycled material. We have proprietary labels, microliner. It's a very thin liner, which allows more labels on a roll. So you can get an 8-inch OD that has 10,000 labels, and an 8-inch OD of microliner might have twice as much, just because you have the ability to have more labels on a roll. But the PCR material on that liner is great innovation. It gives that post-consumer recycled content there, and it allows it to be recycled as well. So to me, that's a win-win, and that's great innovation. Maybe not as sexy, but I think it's pretty sexy.
All right. Thank you, Christine. Thanks for being with us today. And I love all the samples in the background. We didn't get to do a full show and tell.
Oh, thank you. It was a pleasure to be here. I appreciate it.
All right, Mark, we're going to close out our panel today with you if you want to share your favorite innovation for 2021 in the label space.
I would have to say probably a combination of things. I'm kind of a process geek. So in my past life, I ran the servo-driven vision control presses that were utilized in the converting world, where you can do island placement, and you can do all kinds of things that the servo drives allow you to do along with the vision systems. And I think today, 2021, what I'm starting to see at some of the manufacturers they started out looking at the servo drives for speed. And I think what I'm starting to see is they're now understanding they can start to do different things with them, because you can run them at different speeds as you stack and build products. In theory, if you're running the same line speed and you start adding in materials other than a laminate that sticks, you start to build thickness, and then your rollers are running at a different pace. It's pulling it through the press. With the servo drives, you can simply do the math. You can raise those levels, maybe 3, 4, 5 layers. So in theory, I think you're going to see the manufacturers building products that are going to be specific to build specialized things that we've not seen before. And I think the digital print aspect is going to be a part of that.
Well, thank you, Mark, for being with us today. Love the black and white pictures and the background.
That's my hockey stuff. That's Bobby Orr scoring against the Blues. And everybody signed it. And I think most of them are gone now. They're older than me. How about that?
And then the other photo?
The other photo is when I was 10, we won the state championship in soccer, and every one of my teammates signed it. And on that, our claim to fame on that picture is Mark Lamping, who is the president of the Cardinals, and now he's the president of the Jaguars. And he was one of my team members. And then one of the guys who I don't want to point out, he was also one of the top 10 wanted list. So we covered the full gamut when I was in grade school.
Hashtag almost famous.
Yes.
All right. Well, on behalf of RSN, I want to thank everyone for joining us today to talk about all things labels. Big thank you to Mark, Christine, Jenny, and Tom for being on our panel today. Brandon on our marketing team for managing all the tech and behind the scenes work. We will be sending out a recording early next week, so all of you can go back and reference. You can share it with your colleagues. We know there were people who weren't able to attend live today, so we will make that available. That will be on our YouTube channel. We'll be sharing it on social. All the panelists will have a copy as well in case they want to promote and use that. Next week, the final wrap up of our print spend optimization series is Thursday, 1 p.m. Eastern time. And we are talking about all things related to buying content marketing services, which can actually be a really important part of the print procurement process. So good morning, good evening, and afternoon, depending on where you are in the country, and enjoy the rest of your week.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.